Howdy folks, Spencer here, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the stats of the Gorn Hunter Pilot Raider. As always, chapters are listed down below for those of you that want to skip ahead to any specific topic. The first thing I want to take a look at is where this ship originates from, and in this case, it is from Strange New Worlds Season 1, Episode 4. We saw a couple of these ships in that episode chasing and firing on the Enterprise. The Enterprise also was able to destroy some of them, and we got to see a nice shot of one of these things imploding. So if you're wanting to see this thing in action, I'd recommend you go check out that episode. And moving on, let's take a look at how this ship is going to be available in the game. Unfortunately, this is a lockbox ship. It is being put directly into the Infinity Lockbox alongside the release of the Unraveled season. So if you're on PC, that is May 9th, and if you're on console, that is sometime later in May or even possibly June. If you already have a T6 Infinity ship choice pack on you, that pack will be automatically updated alongside the release of the Unraveled season to have this ship as an option. Of course, like any other lockbox ship, it will also be available on the player exchange and via various trade channels. And if you're not wanting to gamble for it or pay absurd amounts for it, it will be available in the event campaign that starts in 2024, which will be Event Campaign 6, and then it will also be available in any following event campaigns after that. So just keep in mind that the currently running event campaign in 2023 will not have this ship as an option, but the one in 2024 and onwards will. And before I get too much further into things, I do have a couple of important notes to go over with this ship. The first thing is, this is an extremely small ship. On the 10 forward stream, they compared it to the size of a shuttle. And the next thing here is that it has a spinning mechanic, just like what we saw on the Courier Pilot's Raider. Now, this caused the Courier to be a very unpopular ship. Even to this day, it is extremely cheap on the exchange. The cheapest one right now is 600 million EC. So for a lockbox ship, that's clearly much lower than most of the other ones out there. So I expect we may see this ship also being a bit cheaper than traditional lockbox ships. But even though it's got the issues with the spinning stuff, I do want to note that it does have some really nice secondary items that may be of interest to some of you. So even if you don't like the ship, you may end up liking the trait or console for plasma-based builds specifically. So I want to give you guys a quick example of what the Courier spin looks like, and then also what the spin looks like on this new Gorn ship. So if I go and start moving forward with the Courier, you see that it starts to spin back and forth. This was wildly unpopular for a lot of people and caused the demand for this ship to be extremely low. So the version of this that we have on the Gorn ship doesn't seem to be as bad, in my opinion, but it is still probably going to deter at least some of you from considering the ship for the ship itself. You can see that there's not as many parts that are spinning there, so it's not as bad, but that may still be disorienting for some of you. And now let's take a look at the stats of this ship. This ship has 5 forward weapons, 1 aft, and an experimental weapon. It has 5 engineering consoles, 1 science, and 5 tactical. It has 2 device slots. It has a battle cloak, and being that it is a pilot raider, it does also have access to the pilot maneuvers. Now, the stats that we don't have for this yet are the mobility and defense stats. However, it's fairly safe to say, with this being a pilot raider, that this ship is going to have very high mobility stats. It's going to move around the map very, very fast. But being a pilot raider, that is the size of a shuttle, it's going to have very low hull and shield capacity compared to other ships out there. So it'll be very fast, but it's not going to be able to take too many hits. And now let's take a look at the bridge officer seating on this ship. Remember, it is a raider, so it's going to have a lot of universal seating to give you a lot of flexibility with how you can build it out. So this thing has a commander tack with pilot, a lieutenant commander universal with merrick worker, a lieutenant commander universal, lieutenant universal, and an ensign universal. So outside of that commander tack, you are free to set those other 4 seats up however you want them set up. So you have many, many different options for how to build this thing out. And heading over to the ship comparison side of things, I do want to note that this is the first ship in the game to have a commander pilot seat along with a lieutenant commander miracle worker seat. It's the first ship to have that specific combo. So for the comparisons today, I'm not going to be comparing to a wide variety of ships. I'm going to be comparing to just one other that is really comparable to this specific ship, and that is the Courier Pilot Raider. So let's take a look at the spreadsheet here. Again, I'm going to be using Fluffle's sortable filterable ship list. There are a few other ships in the game that do have pilot and miracle worker on the same ship, and I can show you that real quick. But if we're looking for tactical focus ships, there's not really that many out there, and the courier is the one that's going to make the most sense to compare against. The only other one that has miracle worker and pilot is the Zenkethi Shaktin, but it doesn't have a full pilot seat, and it's an escort, not a raider, so it's not going to be a good comparison to make there. So looking at the Gorn Hunter Pilot Raider versus the Courier here, if we scroll down, again, we don't have the defense or mobility stats yet for the Gorn Hunter Pilot Raider, but given the fact that it has more engineering consoles, I would not be surprised if its hull modifier is maybe a little bit higher than what the Courier had, and given that it has much less science consoles than what the Courier had, it'll probably have a higher hull mod and then a lower shield mod than the Courier, would be my guess. For mobility, this thing is a pilot raider. You know, the mobility stats are going to be really, really good. And for the power bonus, probably similar to what the Courier had, where it's like 15 to... I could see them do like 15 to weapons and then like 5 to engines there. That would make sense to me for this ship. For the bridge officer seating, we have basically the same thing on both ships. Both have a commander tack with pilot, but the difference is where the miracle worker seating is. The Courier has just a lieutenant universal with miracle worker, whereas the Gorn has a lieutenant commander universal. So you get a slightly better miracle worker seat on the Gorn, which is going to give you a few more options for what miracle worker abilities you can use. For the weapon setup, both are a 5-1 setup. Both can use cannons, of course. Both have an experimental weapon slot. Both have 2 device slots. The consoles do have a couple differences, though. There's 5 TAC consoles on both of them. The Gorn has 5 engineering consoles, whereas the Courier has just 2. And for science consoles, the Gorn has 1, whereas the Courier has 4. And then, of course, the Gorn also has a battle cloak, whereas the Courier does not. So, overall, I think these two ships are extremely comparable. But I think if you're looking to pick up a pilot raider in 2023, and you're looking at getting one that has both pilot and miracle worker, if you're looking at these two ships, I don't see why you would ever pick the Courier Pilot Raider now. The Gorn is a straight upgrade over the Courier Pilot Raider, and I really couldn't recommend the Courier much to begin with, but now I just don't see any reason why you would go and pick up the Courier Pilot Raider when the Gorn Hunter exists. And heading over to some of the secondary items here, the first one is that this ship has some brand new quad cannons on it. These are an alternative version of the plasma quad cannons, and they feature a unique proc that is a 5% chance to apply a minus 30 damage over time debuff to your foe for 30 seconds. So a bit of a higher proc chance than you would normally see. Now, the downside is that this weapon is only going to be unlocked for the character that gets this ship, just like any other item from a lockbox ship. And in addition, if you already have quad cannons on your build, you're not going to be able to use these alongside the existing quad cannons that you have. Quad cannons have a limitation, like a few of the other special weapons in the game, where you can only have one of them active at a time. So you see I've got the quad disruptor cannons on right now, and when I try to put these plasma ones on that I have, I can't equip both of them at the same time. It's one or the other. So if you're getting this Gorn ship for these quad cannons, just keep in mind you can't run them alongside the other quad cannons. But I do think these are probably better than the existing plasma quad cannons we have, given that it's got a proc rate that is 5% rather than the 2.5% that you would traditionally see on a weapon. And next up, we have a brand new experimental weapon. This thing is pretty much being nicknamed the Plasma Shotgun because it's got a shotgun style effect when you fire it, as you can see over at the right there. This thing is forward focused. It can only be fired when you are facing your target, basically. The target's got to be in your forward 90-degree arc. When they showed it off on 10 forward, when they had their aft to the enemy, they could not fire it. So just keep that in mind. Your build needs to be forward focused, which most builds are at this point, but just keep that in mind. Now, this thing has a neat effect in that it scales up the damage it does based on the rank of your enemy. So if you hit this on a cruiser, it's going to do that very top line item of the 12.6k plasma damage, and then it's also going to do that second line item of the 4600. But if you hit this against a Dreadnought, it's going to do all 4 of those line items there. So you can get a bit of damage out of this, but more importantly, it has an interaction with the Starship Trait, which we'll talk about here shortly. And that interaction is that each of these lines here that are triggered against you hitting your foe are going to each add a stack of the trait, which means you're going to be adding quite a few stacks of that dot that the trait provides when you use this experimental weapon against your targets. And now I want to take a look at the Starship Trait Complex Plasma Fires. This Starship Trait will apply a stacking plasma dot when you fire your weapons. Specifically, when you activate energy weapon firing modes, your plasma weapons will apply a stacking plasma damage over time effect on the target, which will last for 30 seconds. This dot will completely ignore shields and will scale with weapon power. If the foe's shield facing is down, it will deal an additional bit of plasma damage. I wonder, you guys see what the issue is with this trait right here? It specifically only works with plasma weapons. So if you're on a phaser build, disruptor, anything that isn't plasma, this Starship Trait is basically worthless for you. And the idea with this is that they're trying to boost the plasma playstyle, and really, I mean, it's good. I like what they're doing here. It is a Starship Trait that basically guarantees you're putting a plasma fire dot on the target every time you fire your weapons. Now, it's not actually every time your weapon fires, rather, it is once every weapon cycle. So every couple seconds for each weapon, you're going to be applying a stack of this to the foe. Now, the damage numbers you see here are low, but that was from Kale's build on 10 forward, which basically wasn't a build at all. So once we have this on hand, you'll be able to buff this number up quite a bit, I would imagine. And if you have a lot of weapon haste on your build, you'll be able to build the stacks up faster because your weapons are firing faster and the cycles are just, going faster. So they can stack up to 100 times on a target, and it will scale up based on weapon power and probably plasma and damage over time buffs. However, it does not scale with EPG skill. In lower difficulty content, I'm not too sure how relevant this trait is going to be. It really depends on where you're at with your build and skill level. If advanced and normal content takes a long time for you, you might see a bit of benefit from a trait like this on a plasma build. However, if you have a high-end build and you're taking it into normal and advanced, you're probably killing most targets, within just a couple of seconds. And at that point, a dot like this probably isn't going to do that much for you. However, I do think if you're in content that takes you a bit longer to complete, this trait would probably be pretty beneficial to you, as this is going to build up stacks over time against a target. And if you can build up a ton of stacks on a target, it is going to help you take them down a bit faster. So, while I don't think it necessarily has a ton of use, I do see some niche scenarios where this might be interesting to mess around with. It's really going to depend on how you play and what your build looks like. But if you're on a plasma build and you do content that doesn't instantly die, then this might be something to look at. And now let's take a look at the console here. This console has some really good passives on it. The clicky, little bit questionable. I think if you're going for this console, it's probably for the passives here. And those passives are 30% Cat 1 damage for damage over time effects, and plus 20% bonus Cat 2 damage for plasma. That's pretty substantial. You typically do not see Cat 2 given away on consoles, and especially in that quantity. That's a really, really large number there. And for the clicky here, it will send a shuttle towards your target or another target if your primary target dies while it's en route, which will probably happen given how slow it travels. It will also aggro other enemies to move closer to it, and once it arrives at its target, it will disable shields of the foe and any other foes within 2.5 kilometers, and that will knock their shields offline for a short duration, which will scale up based on your Drain X skill, and it will also deal some plasma damage to the target. When it comes to shield shutdown, I think the console off of the C-Store Bozeman, the Tachyon Net Drones, is still probably a better console to go with, especially given that's a C-Store ship. But there might be some very niche applications where the AoE shield disable from this may be useful for people, but that's going to be pretty niche. Ultimately, I think if you're getting this console, you're getting it for the passives, which are pretty substantial for boosting dots and plasma damage there. And now the question of who exactly is this ship for? Well, I think the big answer here is that this ship has a lot of things on it that are boosting plasma. And if you're wanting to do something different from what we traditionally see with phaser and disruptor builds everywhere, this is going a long way towards potentially making plasma a little bit more competitive. I don't think it's going to make plasma, match what phasers or disruptors can do, but it's something that's going to help towards that long term. So if you're really invested in the plasma side of things and you really want to boost plasma up, then I would definitely consider picking the ship up for the console trait and the 2 weapons that it comes with. The other set of people that are probably going to be interested in the ship are those of you that were interested in the courier for the pilot miracle worker spec combo. This is a straight up upgrade over the courier. So if you're wanting pilot plus miracle worker, then it makes sense to go for this, especially given that this also has a built-in battle cloak, whereas the courier had no cloak at all. In conclusion, I don't think that the ship is bad. I think it's a capable pilot raider. It'll be as good as any other pilot raider out there, especially if you want that pilot miracle worker combo. Given the recent, buffs to pilot with the revamp earlier this year, it should work fairly fine if you want to set up a directed energy weapon build on it. It's not going to be, the top performer, but it'll still do perfectly fine in any content the game has. Rather, the main appeal to this ship is not the ship itself, it's the secondary unlocks. The trait, console, and weapons are significantly boosting the plasma playstyle and are going to be a game changer for those of you that like to mess around with the plasma side of things. Again, it's unlikely that this is going to push the meta away from phasers or disruptors, especially given how fast content or how fast targets die in lower difficulty content, which is the majority of things that people play. But again, if you're in content where targets are able to live a long time, you're probably going to get a decent amount from this trait, especially once you fully boost it up on a proper plasma build with some dot buffs on it. Overall, I think that this is a fairly decent package. I mean, I think the ship is fine for what it is. I think the accessories are all on paper looking to be pretty solid. So I think it's a ship that you should definitely consider if you meet the criteria that I talked about on the last slide. Especially if you're looking to do plasma stuff, this is, in theory, going to be a pretty big boost to that playstyle. I'll probably end up picking one up and messing around with it myself if you want to wait and see what the numbers look like. I'll probably take a look at that on my next Saturday stream because I'm probably not going to get it day one. So that stream would be on May 13th. So if you want to see it in action, I'll most certainly have the ship by then and we'll be messing around with it. But that's going to be it for this video today. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them down below. Again, thank you to all channel members and viewers for the continued support. See you guys around.